It seems to me that the future of coolers is becoming clearer. That either the engineers have to design some kind of a special mounting system that is not only different between AMD and Intel, but also different in terms of how convex the cold plate is. So for AMD, you need to have a cold plate with low convexity. With Intel, you need it with high convexity, at least for the current sockets. So that means that either the engineers have to, again, make two different mounting systems that take into consideration the problem of convexity, or they have to make two different models, one for AMD, one for Intel. It's kind of like when the Threadripper needed its own special coolers. Now, my guess is, although it would be cheaper to find some trick to adjust the convexity, it may not be something that some companies are able to figure out, and therefore they'll sell two different versions. Now, the bad part of that is any part of the production process that cannot be duplicated for both models is going to add to the price, because instead of having one market for one product, you now have two products, so you're splitting the market. And since more people probably buy Intel than AMD, that means that the price for the Intel product will be lower and the price for the AMD product will be higher, unless Noctua decides to, you know what, let's just even out the cost between the two of them, which may or may not work. Now, if we look at the Arctic Liquid Freezer 3, it has a little trick to the way it mounts on AMD and Intel, where it changes the convexity. So if every company can use that kind of a system where they can adjust the convexity of the cold plate, then yeah, one model will be enough, and that's going to save that company money in the long run. But again, I don't think that every company has the engineering prowess to be able to do that. Now, like for example, if I wanted to create, kind of Frankenstein together my own air cooler to sell that to customers with my brand TPCEA on it, I would go and find different kinds of heat sinks that I could buy directly from the manufacturer at a deep discount. Like I would buy a low profile, I would buy a single tower, dual tower, the towers where they're spread out a lot, parallel to the motherboard, and towers that go high where they're vertically away from the motherboard going a fair distance. And then I would grab the best fans that I could find that would work on those heat sinks. So, it'd probably be things like the Fantex T30, the Super Flower Mega Cools, and then the Silverstone, I can't remember which one it is. It's one of the air penetrators, I believe. Or something similar, like the Iceberg, Ice Gale Extreme, and so on and so forth. Maybe the P12 Max. And I would try to get from those manufacturers it rebranded to my brand, so that I would have the option of saying, you know what, if you'd like to have this option, here's the price. If you want to have this option, here's the price. If you want to have this, not option, but fan. If you want this fan, I could give them a range of choices as far as fans and cost, to give customers the option of saying, hey, wow, I can get this one. This is pretty good performance for what I'm doing. And the high performance people could say, ooh, look at that one. That's pretty expensive, but it's got really good specs. And that's what I need because I don't want to get an AIO. I don't want to get a custom loop or whatever it is. So those are my thoughts on this. And in fact, Noctua's NH-D15 Generation 2 that they are now launching this month in June 2024 actually has gone that route. They have a low convexity version for AMD, a high convexity version for Intel, and you don't want to swap them because if you have an offset mount on your AMD, you will get very similar performance between the the low convexity and the high convexity versions on AMD. If you don't have the offset mount, then you will get poor results from the high convexity version. So there is that option for people, but you have to have that offset mount. Now, that's different from the bend correction frame on the Intel and Intel 12th, 13th, and 14th generation, the hot ones, which are usually the i700s and the i900s. Over time, because of the design of the mount, which looks like this, and it has this bar to force the mounting, this ILM or mounting mechanism to hold the CPU in place. So if you notice and it's kind of hard to know this, but let me try to show you. If you notice, imagine that black plastic piece there from the motherboard is actually the CPU. Where is the CPU being held in place by the mounting pressure? Because this bar, when you close it, and you can see mine is bent, and I believe that is deliberate because this is low memory metal, so it resists being bent back. Yeah, you can bend this back into a straight line, but it's not going to be easy. Over time, that could actually change its shape as the years of pressure deform it. But alternatively, what's going to happen, and at a faster rate, especially if your CPU is getting hot very often, is that your CPU is going to slowly change its shape because all the pressure is centered here. They didn't think about this enough and decide, well, we need to have equal pressure all across this. So let's put one here and 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 here. No, they just have two pressure points. And that means that imagine this is the CPU. As the pressure is applied here over weeks and months and years of intense heat, the CPU is going to slowly start caving in the middle along this line here. So it's going to be like this, and over time it's going to go like this. And that actually is what's happening. And that is why companies like Thermal Grizzly, Thermalright, and now imitators from China are selling these bend correction frames or anti-bend frames, but they're actually bend correction frames because they do two things. Number one, they distribute the pressure equally. And I can't show you one because I've got it on my motherboard. It doesn't help me with my temperatures. However, I'm using it as a prophylaxis against the possibility of damage to the motherboard and the CPU over time. I don't want warping to occur. Now, why would warping occur to the motherboard? Well, all of the pressure that is being applied in two spots on the CPU is being applied on 4 holes around the CPU socket. So it's not equal pressure. Now, is this perfect? No, it's not perfect. However, if you look, you can see that it's applying pressure equally all across the edge of the CPU. And that means that it's going to, all the pressure is being contained in an equal way. It's still got the problem of the holes there, and The back plate for that helps with that, and the back plate can somewhat help, yeah. But if you're not using an offset mount on a newer AMD, and I think it's just 4 and 5, if I remember correctly, that have the chiplets at the bottom edge. Let me just demonstrate. If this is the CPU, the AMD CPU, on the older versions of the CPUs, just like with Intel, the chips that are doing the processing are here in the middle. Now, on the newer ones, the chips are down here. And so if you buy a cooler that was optimized for the chips being in the middle, it's not going to do a very good job on the newer AMD chips or CPUs, because those chips are on the bottom end. You have to reorient that Intel-based cooler to be so that the middle of it is over those chips, and therefore it can optimally cool your CPU. So on AMD, you have to have that offset mount, and on Intel, you have to have the BCF, or bend correction frame. Now, with Arctic Liquid Freezer, they provide their own, which means if you've got one, you got to set it to the side, and it doesn't actually work very well for Intel, but it does work very well for AMD. And yeah, so it's a bit of a problem, because in the past, every vendor has done what they could to make sure that their cooler is compatible with multiple CPUs. But there are limits to what you can accomplish. As the CPU changes in terms of dimensions and where the chips are located, these older coolers are going to be rendered useless for most people. And that's unfortunate, but as technology advances, the cooler makers, whether it's water or air, have to keep up. And this problem equally applies to water and air. So when you order a water cooler sometime in the future, they're either going to have a special mounting device that conforms itself to the convexity of your CPU IHS, which is the top surface, or the cooler comes in two versions. One for AMD, one for Intel. And I think I heard recently that there's a third company coming into the CPU market, although I don't think it's for the mainstream CPUs. I think it was NVIDIA. I could be. I'm sad to hear that, because I don't like NVIDIA. They're very unscrupulous. But yeah. So I hope this gives you some kind of idea of, number one, the challenges we face as especially Intel gets hotter and hotter and hotter, and the challenges between conforming to Intel and AMD, also the bend correction frames and the offset frames, or mounting frames, if you want to call them that. And do keep in mind that when you take the ILM, which is the default mounting frame that comes with your motherboard, off and replace it with either an offset mount or a bend correction frame, you're possibly voiding the warranty for the motherboard, the CPU, or both. Now, I would hope that motherboard manufacturers would be quick to jump on board with the idea of, no, we should not be using these crappy ILMs. We need to have ILMs that meet the needs of the CPU. But, that would require pressure to be put on Intel and AMD and Asus and ASRock and Gigabyte and all the other ones to ensure that they are on board with the idea of, oh yeah, let's, instead of sending out these crappy mounts, let's send out the offsets on AMD. Let's send out the bend correction frames on Intel. Now, that may not be possible, because if those products are patented, they would have to license it. And if the company that makes them doesn't want to license the technology, well, but presumably companies will be happy to that make the original design will be happy to receive royalties. However, there are companies out there that don't care about patents, or they live in a country where they have patented their product, and if they are selling it from their country, maybe there's some workaround where if it doesn't matter and that they're not going to get sued because they're in, say, China, for example, or Vietnam, or Brazil. I don't know. I don't know where other than China and Vietnam, I'm not sure where the other major manufacturing centers are for computer parts. If you have any questions, I'll try to answer them. I would suggest that you look at the Gamers Nexus video on the NHD15 G2 launch at the computer convention, and you can get a lot more details there than what I'm giving you. And I'd also suggest you look at Noctua. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great day.